On the overcast and drizzly dawn of June 30th, Buford's Union cavalry encountered a small force of Heath's infantry at Fairfield, Pennsylvania. Deciding not to commit to battle, Buford withdrew his men and detoured back through Emmitsburg, Maryland, in order to arrive where his orders designated: Gettysburg. Around that time, at Cashtown, the brigade of J. Johnston Pettigrew took roll and then began its march east. Pettigrew's orders called for him to take 3 of his 4 regiments and a battery on a reconnaissance in force to collect information, and some wagons to collect supplies from Gettysburg.
It was told to General Pettigrew that he might find the town in possession of a home guard. But if, contrary to expectations, he should find any organized troops capable of making resistance, or any portion of the Army of the Potomac, he should not attack it. Major General Henry Heath.
Heath's orders apparently echoed Lee's desire to not bring on a general engagement until the entire army was together. Only a short distance into the brigade's march, and not far from Gettysburg's western limits, Pettigrew's advance party met a friendly spy who erroneously reported that a large force of enemy cavalry was already in Gettysburg. The cautious scholar general halted his column to await instructions from Heath on how to proceed. As the brigade waited, an unknown sniper took a shot at the 47th North Carolina, not far from the town of Gettysburg. The 47th's commander wisely backed the regiment off, even though the sniper didn't hit anyone. Pettigrew eventually continued on with his lead elements, gaining full view of Gettysburg by mid-morning. In Gettysburg, Sarah Broadhead's day began with relief. Her husband Joseph had returned, having walked for 36 hours from Harrisburg. Days earlier, he and other railroad workers were captured by Confederates, Sarah was told, and paroled and sent to Harrisburg. Joseph arrived around 1 a.m. on June 30th. But as one worry dissipated for Sarah, another sprung up. As Sarah looked to the west, down the Chambersburg Pike, there atop Seminary Ridge, stood the lead elements of Pettigrew's brigade.
We had a good view of them from our house, and every moment we expected to hear the booming of cannon and thought they might shell the town. Sarah Broadhead.
Meanwhile, 15 miles to the east, Jeb Stuart was aiming to link up with Ewell at Carlisle to the north and hoped to reach Hanover before the Union cavalry did. Stuart would not be so lucky. Riders approached him reporting that they had encountered Union cavalry. It was the division of Brigadier General Hugh Judson Kilpatrick, who had received his brigadier stars on June 13th and assumed command of the 3rd Cavalry Division on June 28th. A sharp cavalry battle took place in the streets and fields of Hanover, Pennsylvania. One of Stuart's aides said, "We stirred up the hornets." After slowly disengaging, Stuart withdrew towards York, having learned from a newspaper that Early's division was there. Back at Gettysburg, at around 10:30 in the morning, Pettigrew and his staff sat on Seminary Ridge. Field glasses and telescopes peered this way and that, searching for signs of the Army of the Potomac. Pettigrew advanced the skirmish line, which disappeared into the town along the Chambersburg Pike.
Our garret window afforded a clear view of the Chambersburg Road, leading up to the Blue Ridge 8 miles away. I went up to the garret, taking with me the small telescope which was used in the astronomical department at the college, a powerful glass. I could see on the top of the hill west of the town a considerable force of Confederates who had come down from the mountains. On the summit stood a group of officers, sweeping the horizon with their field glasses. Back of them, but largely hidden by the shoulder of the hill, my glass enabled me to distinguish men both of infantry and artillery commands. Suddenly, the officers on the crest of the hill turned and rode back, and almost on the heels of the retreat, a roar of shouting arose from the streets below me. I hurried downstairs and saw General John Buford's cavalry division, including 2 brigades, riding into Gettysburg from the Taneytown Road. Professor Michael Jacobs, Pennsylvania College.
That cavalry was indeed the 1st Cavalry Division of Brigadier General John Buford. Samuel Hearp's news of the day before, claiming that thousands of Union troops were just down the road, had proven true, although he was actually referring to Union infantry coming from Emmitsburg, Maryland, not cavalry from Fountaindale, Pennsylvania. While surveilling the town before them, one of Pettigrew's staff spotted a long column of Union cavalry heading towards Gettysburg on the Emmitsburg Road. Keenly aware of his orders not to bring on an engagement if the Army of the Potomac is encountered, Pettigrew took immediate steps to withdraw back to Cashtown. When Buford's division of almost 3,000 cavalrymen reached the intersection of the Emmitsburg Road and Washington Street, it turned left onto Washington, with Colonel William Gamble's brigade in the lead, its 8th Illinois Cavalry at the head of the column, and Colonel Thomas Devon's brigade behind Gamble's. The dirty and sun-bronzed troops of the 1st Cavalry Division were unaware of what the last several days had been like for the people of Gettysburg. The townspeople were in a terrible state of excitement because of Pettigrew's recent advance on the town. The troopers were pleasantly surprised by the jubilant reception they received from Gettysburg's residents, who no doubt received them as their saviors. Lieutenant John Califf, commander of the only battery of artillery with the column, recalled the little girl emerging from the crowd lining the street to hand him a bouquet of flowers. Private Harter, in the 8th Illinois, recalled how a group of schoolgirls singing the battle cry of freedom moved the men to cheer.
A crowd of us girls were standing on the corner of Washington and High Streets as these soldiers passed by, desiring to encourage them who, as we were told, would before long be in battle. My sister started to sing the old war song, Our Union Forever. As some of us did not know the whole piece, we kept repeating the chorus. Thus we sought to cheer our brave men, and we felt amply repaid when we saw that our efforts were appreciated. Their countenances brightened, and we received their thanks and cheers. After the battle, some of these soldiers told us that the singing was very good, but that they would have liked to have heard more than just the chorus. Tilly Pierce.
Cake, milk, water, and beer were passed up the moving column. Doors, windows, and balconies were filled with ladies waving handkerchiefs. Altogether, it was one of the most touching, spontaneous, and heartfelt demonstrations my eyes ever witnessed. It inspired us to heroic deeds. Captain W.C. Hazelton, 8th Illinois Cavalry.
Buford wasted no time once arriving in town, making his headquarters at the Eagle Hotel on the northeast corner of Washington and Chambersburg streets. He sent Devon's brigade north to the area of Gettysburg College and Gamble's brigade west of town along the Chambersburg Pike.
I entered this place today at 11 a.m. Found everybody in a terrible state of excitement on account of the enemy's advance on this place. He had approached to within a half-mile of town when the head of my column entered. His force was terribly exaggerated by reasonable and truthful but inexperienced men. My men and horses are fagged out. I have not been able to get any grain yet. It's all in the country and people talk instead of working. Facilities for shoeing are nothing. Burley's people seized every shoe and nail they could find. Brigadier General John Buford.
Buford's complaint about the lack of help received from the townspeople was by no means representative of all the citizens of Gettysburg. Gettysburg youth Hugh Ziegler recalled, "The boys of the town would visit the camp and ride the soldiers' horses to water, and I was one of them." According to Howard Wirt, General Buford had orders printed up by sending compositors to the office of the Star, who quickly had and typed the orders which were placarded over town.
Sale of spirited liquor of any kind in this town during its occupation by the troops is strictly prohibited. Any violation of this order will be promptly and severely punished. The giving away of liquor will be punished the same as if for sale.
Some of Buford's troopers did have in their canteens Applejack, which they had confiscated in Maryland. That night, the soldiers served some locals liquor. Lee, in the meantime, had moved his headquarters east to the village of Greenwood at the western entrance of the Cashtown Gap, which was presently flooded with Hill's divisions and supply trains. Back at Heath's headquarters, Pettigrew told his commander what he had discovered. Heath could not believe that the force in Gettysburg was anything other than local militia. Soon A.P. Hill rode up, and Pettigrew told him about his foray into Gettysburg. Hill insisted that the cavalry he saw was probably only a small detachment of observation. Pettigrew then called an aide up to tell the story. The aide, who was known to A.P. Hill, asserted that they were well-trained troops. Still, Hill, who had only recently spoken to General Lee, could not or would not believe that any Union force was close enough to cause any worry. As a precaution, he decided to send a much larger force to Gettysburg the next morning on a reconnaissance. All day long, Union couriers were flying from headquarters to headquarters with word of Lee's whereabouts and subsequent orders from Meade to his corps commanders about where they should be placed. Meade sensed that something was in the air for the morrow. Buford was reporting 20,000 Confederates in the area of Cashtown to the west. Buford's information came from a local citizens' intelligence ring. The ring was orchestrated by spy master David McConaughey. A young Robert McLean watched General Buford dismount in front of the Ditterline residence on Chambersburg Street. Buford seated himself on the doorsteps and addressed a dispatch to General Reynolds, conveying information which Mr. David McConaughey, Esquire, was communicating verbally to him. With boyish curiosity and regardless of good manners, Robert looked over the general's shoulder as he wrote. The curious Professor Jacobs of Pennsylvania College wanted a better look at what trouble lay just 8 miles up the road. So he took the telescope used in his science class to the cupola of the Lutheran Seminary on the ridge at the western end of town that bears its name.
I began a careful examination of the mountains to the west, where the Blue Ridge describes a semicircle. Wherever the mountainsides held clearings, smoke curled upward. About the fires, I could see men walking, attending camp chores, cooking, all the activities of an army held in leash. They showed me clearly as though they were not more than a couple of 100 yards away. And below me, within easy eyeshot, were both of Buford's Federal brigades. The tide of war was for the hour halted under my very eyes. Professor Michael Jacobs, Pennsylvania College.
Major General John Reynolds had moved his corps between Emmitsburg and Gettysburg along the Emmitsburg Road. The Moritz Tavern, roughly 8 miles south of Buford's position, would become Reynolds' headquarters. He summoned Major General Oliver Otis Howard of the 11th Corps, and the two shared a meal. We had cheerful conversation on ordinary topics during the meal, Howard would later write, and then retired to a back room, where the general read me some communication he had received from General Meade, requesting us to animate our troops in view of the struggle soon to transpire. General Reynolds treated me with the most marked confidence. Now, all roads lead to Gettysburg. Back at Gettysburg, Buford learned that his division of 2,900 men was outnumbered by the Confederate forces at Cashtown under A.P. Hill. As Buford figured it, Hill was the immediate threat, being only 8 miles or so away. Still, his line would cover both the northerly and westerly approaches, with Colonel Thomas Devens' brigade covering points north, or the division's right, and Colonel William Gamble covering points west, or the division's left. Both lines of battle posted outposts miles ahead of the main line to slow any Confederate advance. Buford's plan was to conduct a defense in depth in order to buy time for Reynolds to bring up the infantry. His main line sat on McPherson's Ridge, facing west down the Chambersburg Pike, which ran on an east-west line. His skirmish line was placed roughly 2 miles west of McPherson's Ridge. If Confederates were to approach from that direction, his skirmish line would be able to slow their advance before they would reach the main line. Buford's signal officer left an account of the situation on the evening of June 30th. It demonstrates Buford's realism and no-nonsense personality.
On the night of the 30th, General Buford spent some hours with Colonel Tom Devon, and while commenting upon the information brought in by Devon's scouts, remarked that the battle would be fought at that point, and that he was afraid it would be commenced in the morning before the infantry would get up. These are his own words. Devon did not believe in so early an advance of the enemy, and remarked that he would take care of all that would attack his front during the ensuing 24 hours. Buford answered, "No, you won't. They will attack you in the morning and they will come booming. Skirmishers 3 deep. You will have to fight like the devil to hold your own until supports arrive. The enemy must know the importance of this position and will strain every nerve to secure it. And if we are able to hold it, we will do well." First Lieutenant Aaron Brainerd Jerome.
That evening, Meade was satisfied that Lee's army was in the mountains between Chambersburg and Gettysburg. Unaware of Lee's intentions, Meade ordered Reynolds to move his left wing to the place the following morning. Lee had no idea Federal infantry was within a few hours' march of Gettysburg like it was. As Major Daniel of Early's staff later said at the 5th annual reunion of the Army of Northern Virginia, such is war, a game of skill and chance, a game of chess and blind man's bluff compounded together. As the sun sank behind the mountains, Lydia Ziegler climbed the steps to the cupola of the Lutheran Seminary and soaked in the scene that spread out before her.
The campfires of the enemy were all along the Blue Mountain side, only 8 miles distant, while below us we beheld our little town entirely surrounded by thousands of campfires of the Union Army. As we stood on that height and watched the soldiers on the eve of battle, our hearts were made heavy. Many of the soldiers were engaged in letter writing, perhaps writing the last loving missives their hands would ever pen to dear ones at home. Lydia Ziegler.
The sun set at 7:24 p.m. on the last day of the first half of 1863. Any light on the land was man-made and hard to find. The moon, rising just after midnight, was almost full. As darkness blanketed the valley, there for the whole town to see out by Cashtown were the campfires of Heath's Confederate Division of A.P. Hill's Corps, dotting the mountains like stars in the night sky. It was the last night that the citizens of Gettysburg were able to delude themselves into thinking the war would pass them by.
Gettysburg, June 30th, 1863. 10:30 p.m. Major General Reynolds. I'm satisfied that A.P. Hill's Corps is massed just back of Cashtown, about 9 miles from this place. The enemy's pickets, infantry, and artillery are within 4 miles of this place, on the Cashtown Road. My parties have returned that went north, northwest, and northeast. They heard nothing of any force having passed over it lately. Near Hattiesburg today, one of my parties captured a courier of Lee's. He says Ewell's Corps is crossing the mountains from Carlisle. Rhodes' division being in Petersburg in advance. Longstreet, from all I could learn, is still behind Hill. I have many rumors and reports of the enemy advancing upon me from toward York. I have to pay attention to some of them, which causes me to overwork my horses and men. Should I have to fall back, advise me by what route. Respectfully, J&O Buford.
Captain Hazelton of the 8th Illinois Cavalry was in command of a picket post on the Chambersburg Pike near a farmer's house. That night, the farmer invited him and the soldier with him in to have supper. Hazelton explained to the farmer that he was on duty and couldn't accept the invitation. The kindly old farmer offered to hold his post for him while Hazelton ate. Eventually, the farmer went out to the men and chatted with them until late into the night. Hazelton, along with the rest of Buford's men, spread their blankets on the ground and replayed the events of the day in their minds. The encouragement given them by the citizens of Gettysburg made them feel capable of grander, nobler deeds than they had yet performed. In his dreams that night, Hazelton thought of the girls in Gettysburg that day and saw his own sisters waving their handkerchiefs. West of Marsh Creek, intersecting the Chambersburg Pike, over 800 men in the 26th North Carolina were busy setting up their picket lines. The night went without incident. In 3 days, 588 of these men would be dead or unfit for duty. Along the road between Emmitsburg, Maryland, and Gettysburg, Solomon Meredith's Iron Brigade of 1,830 men and officers camped with little concern of a battle looming on the horizon. 3 days later, they would be down 1,150 men, a loss of 63%. Confederates and Federals alike, spread out all over south-central Pennsylvania and northern Maryland, bedded down on the roads to Gettysburg and immortality.